Rev up your engines!
Well, looks like Volkswagen is in trouble. They are warning that they're going to close factories in Germany because they say they have an extremely tense situation. Now, since 1994, Volkswagen had an employment protection agreement, said they're not going to fire anybody. But now, well, things are changing. As the CEO of Volkswagen, Thomas Schaefer, says, the situation is extremely tense and cannot be resolved through simple cost-cutting measures. Well, they're having problems making money. Well, no surprise, as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the stuff Volkswagen makes is absolute junk, and they put a whole bunch of money into electric cars that aren't panning out all that well. Volkswagen now says they can't rule out closing factories in Germany. Time marches on. You can't live on your laurels. They've made a lot of mistakes. They bought crazy car companies, and instead of just being simple old Volkswagen, now they own all these other companies, and they're not doing too hot. Their luxury car brands are kind of going down the toilet. Now, this kind of gives you an idea what's really happening. They say the economic environment became even tougher and new competitors are entering the European market. Well, we all know what they're talking about. Chinese making electric cars and selling them, right? They can make them cheaper, and they seem to do a decent job doing it. You don't hear about them all blowing up or anything. Now they're talking about maybe they're going to have to close their factories down because they're not competitive. You know, and the trade unions are all mad. Now, you said you're not going to get rid of workers. Well, guess what? If people don't buy your products, you go out of business. I don't understand how Volkswagen has stayed selling as many cars as they have, as long as they have, judging by the lack of quality of the cars they sell in the United States. It kind of amazes me that they're still in business. But, hey, they're going to be shutting down factories soon, it looks like. And of course, you know, they've made mistakes in what they sell. Volkswagen even said that brands within the company would need comprehensive restructuring. Looks like Volkswagen may have seen its day of selling a whole bunch of cars and being a really profitable company. Looks like they made a lot of mistakes betting on electric cars that aren't selling. And now, well, they're shaking things up. Well, China has now positioned itself as the main car supplier to Mexico. And people in the United States are worried. Are they coming here next? Realize that Chinese exported $4.6 billion worth of cars in 2023. And they now are numero uno sending cars to Mexico. Probably a test market for China more than anything else. Because, of course, China sells a whole bunch of electric cars. They're really pushing it. And electric cars aren't very big in Mexico. When China exported all those $1 billion worth of cars in 2023, only 19,487 cars were electric cars. And they weren't all Chinese ones. So it's kind of a test market for China. And for example, they are selling a Tesla competitor called the Dolphin Mini model, which is $21,300. Now, to us, that's dirt cheap for an electric car. But for somebody in Mexico, that's not cheap. It's a country that doesn't have all that much money. It's more of a test market than anything else when it comes down to it. Mexico's never been a real big area that people are really booming to make money. They really want to use it as a little step to get into the United States. The Fiat 500s, right? Well, the ones sold in the United States were made in Mexico. They snuck them in that way. Because, of course, there's the tariff-free access between things made in Mexico and the United States, back and forth. So maybe they're going to try sneaking that in and see what happens, right? But, I mean, personally, I'm not that worried about it myself because electric cars, people aren't that into them as it stands today. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. The Chinese may make them, but odds are people in the United States aren't going to buy that many of them because it's a technology not ready for prime time, regardless of its price. If you have a vehicle and you're worried about range anxiety, where are you going to charge it, who's going to fix it, especially if it's something made in China, right? If you've ever bought some off-brand Chinese thing like a bicycle or something, electric bicycle, when it breaks, good luck getting parts for it or any kind of technical support. It pretty much doesn't exist, so it's not something I'm particularly worried about. Well, I'm warning you, be leery about buying a used, worn-out Tesla. There was a guy that bought a sight unseen Tesla Model S for $5,000. Now it had 200-something thousand miles. It had been on various wrecks. Now it would only go a certain speed. It was locked out. Now the guy who bought it does vehicles over for a living, so he's an expert in rebuilding cars. I guess he wanted to toy around with what the heck, $5,000. What's $5,000? I mean, if the guy actually rebuilds stuff all the time, he knows that thing's worth 2 to 3 times that in parts alone. It had brand new tires, aftermarket rims. You can always sell that stuff to somebody if it gets too far in, but the average person, you're out of your mind if you buy one of those things, especially one for $5,000 with 260,000 miles on it that's been through the washing machine. The guy's seen it's been wrecked a bunch of times. And electric vehicles with all that wiring in one little bend hit something, it can short out the whole car. Don't think you're going to get a big deal on something like that. This guy's a pro, and even he admitted, well, let's see what happens. If he's going to actually fix it up, who knows? But interestingly enough, if you didn't know, there are these crazy Ukrainians, and a bunch of them buy smashed up, wrecked, flooded, whatever Teslas. They put them together in Ukraine, and they don't mind fooling around with a bunch of stuff. They understand electronics, obviously, because they're messing with drones to attack the Russians with. So kind of weird. All these Teslas get whacked up in the United States. They end up in Ukraine. I had one, and he's like, hey, somebody's using my Spotify account. Well, he didn't delete it from Tesla, and it was in Ukraine now. Listen to Spotify. Well, there's a new entrance company into ride sharing. Uber and Lyft aren't the only ones. This one is called Revo, and it's planning on using blockchain so that the drivers can get more money out of it and less money is taken by the company. For example, guy just took a ride with Uber and it was $176. And out of that 176, the driver only got $40. Yeah, we can guess where the rest of it went, right? Profit for the company. On things like that, I've seen it myself. If it's a real expensive ride, what a lot of guys will do with Uber is they'll cancel the ride for you. Then you pay him cash. Then you pay a lot less. The guy gets more money, and Uber gets out of the chain. Anybody can realize all these systems have loopholes in them that people get away with, right? But rather than having to deal with loopholes, these Revo guys, they're thinking about blockchains where the guys can use that and they can help build up their own clientele that way, not be as stuck with giving the majority of their money to the big companies like Uber and Lyft. I mean, it's only a matter of time somebody could figure something like this out. Now, a smart individual, of course, would be able to do it themselves. They can get their own software for doing it, get their own clientele of people that want to ride with them. And I've known people that did that when it was just yellow cab. They'd have their own clientele they'd give rides to. And they just set it all up for their own clientele. And some of the time they'd be doing a yellow cab thing, but most of the time they had private clientele that would just call them up on a phone and say, hey, I need a ride here, darling. And they'd set it up, put it on their computer. Anybody who's smart enough can set it up themselves. They don't have to depend on the big company. And this company seems to be kind of a medium one. The people that are driving aren't doing it all themselves, but they get more involved in it. And they'll get a higher percentage of the profit. It only makes sense that somebody come up with something like this because the tremendous profit that companies like Uber and Lyft are making with very little capital, insurance, all the people are doing on their own cars. Hey, sounds like a pretty good idea. Good luck starting this Revo thing up. I'll give it a try when next time I travel somewhere if I can find it. Well, more of these wind turbines are falling apart, and now there was a blade failure at this Dogger Bank A. And GE says, of course, it was the commissioning process. They didn't install it correctly. That was the problem. Now, we all know how that goes. If you get something and then it doesn't work, the people who build it will blame the installers. I've seen that happen so many times with people with solar panels. They'll get a solar panel in their house, doesn't work right? So they contact the company that made them. And if they even send the guy out, invariably they say, not our fault. Solar panels are good. Your installer screwed it up. He's going to have to fix the whole problem. And, of course, the installer's going to say, oh, no, he sold me bad panels. Don't look at me. It's not my fault. And you're the one stuck in the middle. Well, in this case, they're trying to blame it on the installers. Now, the one that broke off the coast of Rhode Island in Massachusetts. Now, they did admit that the blade was made wrong, and that one kind of exploded. But this one in Dogger Bank happened later, and now they're trying to blame it on the people who didn't put it on right. They're wising up. And we can't say we built them wrong, and these blades are breaking. Let's blame it on the people who are installing them, right? And then you can imagine the lawsuits. This person would sue them, then the subcontractors would sue the contractors, and then the company will go bang. bankrupt, and then you're stuck with something that doesn't work. All right? We all know what happens when there's more than one group involved in putting something together, that everybody's going to be blaming everyone else. If it ever goes to court, the lawyers are going to be all over the place suing everybody. Like I say, GM Vernova, that's combination company, they established that during the commissioning process being performed by the installation company, the turbine was left in a fixed and static position, rendering it vulnerable during a subsequent storm with high winds. These things have so many problems that make your head spin, and now everybody's going to be blaming it on everybody else, instead of going to the root problem, which is it's a stupid idea in the first place, and trying to implement it isn't going to create that much electricity. They don't last long, and some of these things, they don't even get them built before the stupid things break. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.